This couple booked a night at the most infamous murder house in horror history, thinking it would be fun. But what they don't realize is, tonight, someone else is already inside. Scott is thrilled to be in a real-life murder house. But Madison isn't interested in the history. She just wants to find a bathroom. While she heads off, Scott continues exploring the house, clearly enjoying every moment. And splitting up? That's always the first mistake. After a while, Madison starts looking for Scott, but instead, she comes face to face with Ghostface. Panicking, she tells Scott that Ghostface is inside. But instead of being scared, Scott gets excited. The two of them go back in, and sure enough, there's a Ghostface figure standing there. But Scott quickly realizes something. It's fake. Curious, he walks closer and discovers it's just a prop with a motion sensor. They head into the kitchen, looking around when suddenly the phone rings. Scott immediately answers it. A voice on the other end welcomes them to the Massacre House experience and tells them it's time to play a game. Scary movie trivia. 3 questions. Get one wrong and he dies. Scott finds it amusing and confidently answers the first 2 questions correctly. Then the caller asks, "In Friday the 13th, how old was Jason when he drowned?" Scott quickly thinks and answers 11. But the caller tells him he's wrong. Madison realizes it's a trick question. Jason never drowned. Impressed, the caller tells her that Scott is lucky to have her. After that, Scott heads to the bathroom. Meanwhile, Madison receives a call from an unknown number. When she answers, a voice tells her something chilling. She's going to die tonight. At first, she assumes it's Scott playing a prank. But when the caller turns aggressive, she realizes this isn't a joke. The voice coldly tells her, the fun part is over. Uneasy, Madison steps out to find Scott. Just then, the fake Ghostface figure suddenly says, "They're not finished yet." Thinking it's just the prop, she walks closer to confirm. But suddenly, another Ghostface appears and she punches him, only to realize it's Scott in costume. He admits it was a bad joke, but Scott notices the fake Ghostface has moved. Madison brushes it off as electronic, but Scott insists it moved differently. And in the next second, the Ghostface lunges at him and drives the knife into Scott's head, killing him instantly. Terrified, Madison tries to run, but Ghostface chases her down and grabs her. She fights back desperately and manages to escape upstairs. For a moment, it seems like she might get away, but the killer catches her again. With all her strength, she pushes him down, but in the process, she ends up hanging from a chandelier. Struggling to hold on, her grip begins to slip, and moments later, she falls straight onto Ghostface's knife. The killer slowly stands up. He pulls the knife out of her body, and what he does next is even more brutal. He sets the house on fire. Flames begin to spread rapidly. Then, he pours gasoline over her. She cries and begs him to stop, but the killer shows no mercy. He lights a match and burns her alive before calmly walking away from the burning house. And while the killer walks away unnoticed, someone else is about to be pulled into this. Someone who has no idea what's coming. Tatum is alone in her room when she hears a noise outside her window. Curious, she goes to check only to be startled by her boyfriend, Ben. Surprised, she asks what he's doing there, and he casually says he's never snuck in through her window before. He was watching Stab, and it made him think of her. They start getting close, but suddenly, Sidney knocks on the door and walks in. Tatum pretends to be alone, but Sidney immediately notices Ben and questions it. Ben awkwardly gets up, asks how she is, and Sidney simply tells him to get out. The next morning, Sidney notices Tatum wearing her old jacket and asks where she found it. Tatum says she got it from the attic, then asks if she's not allowed to wear it. Sidney says she should have asked first, and Mark suggests she take it off. Annoyed, Tatum removes the jacket and walks inside. Sidney follows her and says she can wear it, but Tatum brushes it off. Sidney apologizes, saying it just caught her off guard. She thought she had gotten rid of it. Tatum brings up Sidney's past, hinting it's something they avoid discussing. Sidney denies it, saying everything is already public, but Tatum implies she still can't ask questions. Later, at Sidney's cafe, Lucas brings up a Dateline episode about the New York Ghostface killings. His mom, Jessica, walks in and checks if he's mentioned it, but Sidney says it's fine. Lucas explains he's into true crime and apologizes, saying he wants to start a podcast on the case. Sidney and Jessica talk about their pasts and parenting. Sidney admits she's struggling with Tatum, wanting to know about her history, which she finds too dark to share. Jessica says it's natural and warns that overprotecting kids won't prepare them for an unsafe world. At rehearsal, Tatum trips and gets in Hannah's way, causing an accident. Aaron quickly apologizes, saying he panicked after seeing Fluffy and freaked out. Tatum says she couldn't see anything in the costume, then apologizes to Hannah, who says it's fine. George calls Tatum aside and tells her she lacks energy and confidence, to which Tatum says she'll work on it. George reminds her she's Sidney's daughter and she needs to channel some of her mother's fire. After he leaves, her friends support her, telling her not to let George get to her, and that her Fluffy is already incredible. Meanwhile, Sidney receives a call, and she's shocked to see Stu Macker on the screen. She scoffs, saying Stu is dead, but the caller calmly disagrees. Then he mentions Tatum, calling her pretty. Sidney immediately warns him to stay away from her, but he reveals something chilling. He's outside Tatum's high school theater. Panicked, Sidney calls Mark and tells him there's a killer going after Tatum. Mark immediately radios all available units and rushes toward the school. Meanwhile, in the theater's dressing room, Tatum suddenly feels like she's not alone. She looks around, but no one is there. At the same time, Hannah and Aaron are rehearsing when Aaron suddenly hears a loud clang in the distance. But Hannah calls out to him and tells him to focus. As Aaron raises the rig, Hannah gets lifted into position. But just then, she hears a thud. She calls out to Aaron, but there's no response. Then suddenly, the lights go out. Panicking, Hannah looks around. And then, a spotlight turns on. She nervously asks Aaron to bring her down and struggles with the harness. But instead, she hears a door open and close. Suddenly, she's lifted higher into the air. Before she can react, the rope drops and she lands back down, only to be lifted again. And that's when Ghostface appears, slowly walking toward her. As she swings helplessly, he begins slashing at her. She begs him to stop, but he shows no mercy. And finally, he slashes her open, killing her. Just then, Sidney arrives. Furious, she raises her gun and shoots him, but Ghostface escapes. Moments later, Mark arrives with the police, and nearby, Sidney discovers Aaron's dead body. Just then, Tatum runs in, and relieved, Sidney immediately pulls her into an embrace. Later, as the police investigate, Chloe says she was downstairs in the costume shop. Tatum says she was there too, but didn't see her. George claims he had already gone home, saying he was having dinner and a drink. Mark tells Sidney that whoever did this knew the place well. It was planned and executed carefully. Sidney wonders if it could be Stu. But Mark reminds her that Stu is dead and buried in Woodsboro. He says they're sending the recorded call to the state police to trace it. Sidney then asks about Ben, pointing out he's good with computers. But Mark replies that these days, anyone can create deepfakes. Sidney tells Tatum they're leaving. Ben starts to follow, but Sidney stops him. When they return home, the officers quickly enter and search the house. After checking everything thoroughly, a deputy informs Mark. It's all clear. However, the attic door slowly slides open. As they pack to leave the house, Tatum says she thought the great Sidney Prescott never ran. Sidney insists they have to go, or more people could die. Tatum asks why she didn't warn her earlier. Maybe she could have done something. Sidney avoids the question and tells her again. They need to leave. Sidney goes to Mark and asks why he turned off the lights, but Mark says he thought she did. Alarmed, they step out and slowly head toward Tatum's room. And then, Tatum walks out with Ghostface holding a knife to her throat. Sidney begs him to let her go, but Ghostface shakes his head. She tells Mark to drop his gun. Mark hesitates, then does it, and Ghostface kicks the gun away. Sidney says he wants her, not Tatum, so he should let her go, but Ghostface refuses. Suddenly, Mark lunges at him and kicks him. A fight breaks out, and after a while, Sidney joins in, but Ghostface overpowers them and hurls Mark down the stairs, knocking him unconscious. Sidney and Tatum run and hide inside a safe room. As Ghostface reaches them, Sidney knocks him back and slams the door shut. Ghostface gets up and begins pounding on the door, trying to break in. Sidney says she's going to get her dad, but Tatum, terrified, begs her not to leave her alone. As they try to escape through another exit, Ghostface suddenly hears Tatum's voice behind the wall. He taps the wall with his knife, then suddenly stabs it through. Panicked, Sidney and Tatum try to squeeze away, but Ghostface keeps stabbing again and again. Sidney quickly strikes the knife, bending it and making it harder for him to pull it out. Using that moment, they keep moving forward, but Ghostface isn't done. He grabs a fireplace poker and thrusts it through the wall. Still, they don't stop. They keep pushing forward. As the killer comes out of the house, Mark lunges at him from behind. A fierce fight ensues between them, but Ghostface knocks him down. Sidney tells Tatum to go get the police, and as she runs, Sidney uproots a mailbox from the ground and hits the Ghostface with it. Mark charges at him, managing to throw him away on the road. The Ghostface gets up, only to get hit and run over by a car. Sidney rushes to check on Mark, and it turns out that Gale Weathers was driving that car. Sidney meets Gale and tells her that the caller claimed he was Stu. Gale is shocked to hear that, but says, let's unmask the killer and find out the truth. When they finally unmask him, it's not Stu, but Sidney says she saw him earlier that day at the coffee shop. Later, Cook tells them the killer was Carl, a triple murderer who escaped from a psychiatric hospital 2 weeks ago. After she leaves, Mark assures Sidney that it's over, but Sidney disagrees, saying it was too easy, and reminds him that there's always more than one. As she steps aside, Sidney scans the crowd. She spots George, but then she looks again, and notices Ben is there too. Later, Sidney asks Gale how she knew to come here, and Gale says, while other reporters rushed to the Macker house, her instincts told her Woodsboro was played out. Noticing Gale's hand shaking, Sidney asks about it, and Gale says it's just nerve damage from the New York attack. Gale then asks when they're starting the investigation, but Sidney says she is not doing it as she needs to stay with her family and keep them safe. Gale says, that's exactly why they need to do it, because whoever is targeting her isn't going to stop. Just then, the phone rings, and it's Stu again. He taunts both Sidney and Gale. Gale fires back, calling him just AI, but Stu calmly replies they'll see how fake he is when he stabs her in the throat, and he's going to enjoy every second of it. Then the call cuts. Gale, unsettled, says that was weird, and Sidney replies, they're starting with the psychiatric hospital. The next day, Tatum tells Sidney that she wants to go with her, but Sidney refuses, saying she doesn't have the skill set for this. Tatum tells her to teach her, saying she doesn't want to end up like the other Tatum. Sidney says she was my friend, but Tatum replies, she was a victim, not a fighter. Sidney tries to explain, but Tatum walks away, saying, now she knows what Sidney really thinks of her. Sidney and Gale visit the hospital, where they meet Marco. Gale asks if Carl had any reason to target Sidney and her family. Marco says he don't know, but he's glad Sidney is okay. Gale then asks if Carl ever mentioned the Ghostface killings, and Marco says he doesn't remember anything like that. Sidney shows him a photo of Stu, and Marco identifies him as John Doe, a patient with amnesia from a head injury that also caused his scars. He says John was admitted in the late 90s and points out his old room. They go to the room, and when Gale asks where John is now, Marco tells them he was released 2 weeks ago. Sidney asks if he knows where he went, and Marco says they'd need a court order for that information. But John Doe and Carl were very close. Meanwhile, Mindy suggests gathering all the suspects in one place, believing the killer is likely one of the friends. Even with the town under curfew, Tatum says she can work around her dad so they can bring everyone together, because she doesn't want to just sit back. She doesn't want to be useless. Sidney tells Gale the police are ready to trace the killer's call, but Gale insists they can't wait and must lure him instead. Sidney agrees and decides to give an interview to bait the caller. Meanwhile, Ghostface ambushes Mark in the house. The killer wraps him in a plastic sheet, and before Mark could react, he brutally stabs him. That evening, Tatum gathers all her friends at Chloe's parents' bar and introduces them to Chad and Mindy. Ben asks if they think it's one of them, and Tatum admits it's possible, even if she doesn't want to believe it. She then asks Ben if he can tell whether the calls are fake, and Ben says if they are, they're extremely convincing, but they could also be real-time calls. Chad adds that if it really is Stu Macker, then he must have an accomplice, because he can't be in 2 places at once. which raises the question, who is it? Meanwhile, Gail interviews Sidney. Sidney reveals that she and her family has been attacked twice by someone claiming to be Stu Macker. Although Stu was believed to be dead, Sidney admits she's starting to have doubts. She even speaks directly to him, asking him to call her and end the violence. But when no call comes, the interview continues. Gail shifts to more personal questions about Sidney's children, mentioning that one of them is named after Tatum, who was brutally killed years ago. That crosses a line. Upset and unwilling to bring her kids into this, Sidney gets frustrated and walks out of the interview. Gail follows Sidney, and Sidney says that was unfair. Gail insists people want to know. But Sidney asks, what if she had asked her about Dewey on live TV? Gail says she would have said she's fine, because that's what she tells herself every single day just to get through it. Tatum asks Ben, how far is the TV station? To which he says it's super close and he will take her. Just then, the phone rings. Sidney rushes to answer. It's Stu, who immediately starts mocking her. Gail asks, where is he? And he calmly says he's at Parker's Tavern with Tatum. Sidney insists Tatum isn't there, but he tells her she broke curfew, and now he's going to punish her. He then hangs up, and Gail quickly tells Robbie to call the police and send them to Parker's Tavern. Meanwhile, as Ben and Tatum gets in his car, she looks at his laptop and asks if he created what's on it. Ben says it's just to see if it was possible, but she becomes convinced he's behind everything. Ben denies it, but she doesn't believe him. She suddenly knocks him unconscious and gets out of the car. But just then, Ghostface appears. Meanwhile, Mindy rushes to check the pizza while Lucas heads to the bathroom. Chad worries they shouldn't have left Tatum alone with Ben, and Mindy notes the two main suspects conveniently disappeared. They decide to go look for Tatum, but when they reach the door, it's locked. Inside, Chloe suddenly comes face to face with Ghostface in the kitchen. She tries to run, but he disappears. For a moment, it seems like he's gone. Then suddenly, he appears right in front of her. She fights back, but he overpowers her and knocks her down. Desperate, she grabs a knife and swings, accidentally stabbing Chad. The killer pulls the knife out. Mindy tries to fight, but he slashes her across the stomach, and Chloe takes the chance, hits him, and runs. She runs into Lucas and tells him the killer is inside. He says he's got it and goes in, despite her warning. Moments later, he's thrown out through the door, landing right on Chloe. She pushes him aside and sees the truth. He's been stabbed. Panicked, as Chloe hides behind the counter. The killer walks out, searching for her. She remains waiting until the footsteps fade. Thinking he's gone, she stands up. But suddenly, the killer grabs her. She struggles, trying to escape, but he grabs her and slams her head into the counter, then drags her into a pile of glass, killing her brutally. The killer then turns to Lucas. He hoists him off the ground and slams his head straight onto a beer tap. Metal punches through skull. The killer stands there watching, as beer starts pouring from Lucas's mouth. Meanwhile, Tatum is chased by Ghostface, but she manages to knock him down and run away. She frantically calls for help, but due to the lockdown, the streets are completely empty. Desperate to save herself, she hides behind a pillar when Ben suddenly finds her, and when she asks if he has seen the killer, he says no. He tries to explain that it's not him, but the killer attacks and stabs him right in front of her eyes. Tatum pushes the killer into a store, but it's too late. Ben is dead, and as the killer gets back up, she runs away in panic. She manages to reach her mom's cafe, and as she enters, Sidney receives a security alert on her phone. The killer peeks inside, but seeing no one, he turns and walks away. Tatum texts her mom, who replies that the gun is in the office. Tatum cautiously heads toward it, but suddenly, someone knocks on the door, and as she turns back, the killer enters the code and unlocks it. Tatum quickly rushes into the office and locks the door, securing it with a rack and a desk. Sidney checks the cameras and sees Tatum inside while the killer waits outside. She calls Tatum and tells her that she won't make it in time, but reassures that she'll stay with her. She tells Tatum the gun is in the safe and that the code is her birthday. Tatum opens the safe and grabs the gun, but she doesn't know how to use it. Sidney tells her to put in her earbuds as she'll need both hands. Tatum follows her instructions as the killer desperately tries to break in. Suddenly, the killer stops and Tatum tells her mom she thinks he's gone. But Sidney warns her that he's looking for another way in. She explains that the gun is loaded and that Tatum just needs to turn off the safety. Tatum does so, and Sidney tells her to aim and pull the trigger, and when he goes down, shoot him in the head. Tatum hesitates, saying she can't do it, that she's not like her. But Sidney insists that she is, and tells her to focus. As Tatum stands up, Sidney instructs her to shoot through the calendar, but when the killer moves, she tells her to aim to the right of the door. Panicking, Tatum pulls the trigger, and Sidney tells her she got him. As Tatum steps out of the room, Sidney tells her she'll have to walk around him, but before doing that, shoot him in the head. Tatum says he's dead, but suddenly he gets up and grabs her. She fights back, but he knocks her down. He then picks up his knife and approaches her, but she knocks him down with the cylinder. As she tries to escape, another Ghostface appears, and before she can react, both of them lunge at her together. When Sidney reaches the cafe, she gets a call from the killer, who tells her that he isn't going to hurt Tatum until she's there to witness it. Sidney rushes to her home, where Ghostface has tied Tatum to a chair. She immediately puts her gun down and slides it away, then demands to know what the killer wants from her. Ghostface removes his mask, revealing himself as Marco. He then calls out to another Ghostface, who appears and presses a knife against Tatum's throat. Marco steps aside and tells Sidney he'll be right back. After a while, Marco drags Mark outside, and he's still alive. The second Ghostface then removes their mask, and Sidney is stunned to see that it's Jessica. Marco explains that he has a background in AI and was once a Google security specialist. Jessica confronts Sidney, accusing her of abandoning everything she stood for. Sidney tries to reason with her, but Jessica reveals she once saved her life, then ruined it. Trapped in an abusive marriage, Jessica says Sidney's book inspired her to fight back. So she trained, planned, and eventually killed her husband. But when Sidney disappeared, Jessica felt betrayed because to her, a Ghostface story only matters if Sidney is there. Sidney explains she wanted to show people life beyond trauma, but Jessica rejects that, saying trauma defines her. She reveals she ended up in a psychiatric center, where she met Marco, leading to this moment. Sidney apologizes and offers a fresh start, but Jessica refuses, deciding her new beginning is killing Sidney. When Sidney reminds her about her son, Jessica chillingly admits he's gone because he reminded her of his father. She finishes by taunting Sidney, saying her daughter Tatum will watch her die, just like Sidney once did. Suddenly, Tatum attacks Jessica, and Sidney shoots Marco, but Jessica manages to escape. They rush to check on Mark, and Sidney tells Tatum to call an ambulance. Sidney heads back inside the house, searching for Jessica, but Jessica suddenly attacks, and a brutal fight breaks out. Sidney gains the upper hand at first, but Jessica fights back and throws her aside. The struggle continues until Sidney finds an opening and stabs her in the stomach, but Jessica refuses to go down. She pulls the screwdriver from her own wound and lunges again until Tatum rushes in and shoots her. As Tatum checks on Sidney, she's told to finish it with a headshot, but when they look up, Jessica is gone. Both of them start searching the house, when suddenly, Jessica charges at them again, but both Sidney and Tatum fire, shooting her in the head, and finally killing her. Later, it's revealed that Chad and Mindy survived, and Gail gives Mindy the chance to go live. Mark is also still alive and is taken to the hospital. Sidney sits with Tatum and tells her this is exactly what she never wanted for her, but Tatum says it was never really up to her. Sidney then explains that Tatum was her best friend, funny, outspoken, and strong, and that's why she named her Tatum, because it was her wish for her to grow up strong and unafraid. That's it for today's recap. If you liked it, hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for more.